Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Media Show. I'm Nick Pallavito. I'll be your host today, and we have guests from around the world coming in. First of all, we're going to bring in from Georgia, maybe now in Rutgers, Adam Lamperero. And from the United States, we have Kim Calhoun. And from Australia, we have Shaquille. Muriel Gerelson and Rex Lee were scheduled to be here, but I don't see either one of them here, number one.
I'll check on it.
Okay, and number two,
the Caster wasn't on.
The intro from David Walker disappeared out of the system.
Oh.
So I can't tell you why. So the thing is, I'm using the world politics.
Rex is in the house.
No, Rex is in the house.
Merle will probably be joining right behind him. Good morning, Rex. Rex Lee from Texas.
Right. Yeah, he's supposed to be talking about his new upcoming show, so I wanted to get him aboard on this. So anyway, yeah, I thought it was an interesting discussion. Sad that you have a smart politician and they never make it. You know, in other words, like he knows he's an odds-on not favorite to win. But
last time I checked his odds, I've been keeping an eye on his campaign actually because I'd love to see him win it. But especially, I think he's in division. I think it's 30, and I think he's losing that at the moment in the polls by about 40 points. So it'd be very hard for him to win it. But look, he brings up some good points. Like, every time I'm in that area, Gascon, they tried to recall him. I mean, it's just, it's a disaster what they've done over there.
Oh, well, that's the problem. Okay, in other words, one of the problems is the way that the parties work here. All good ideas go to die. And it's really, really horrible. In other words, that's the reason I like that he had the third-party candidates on the other day, because you need to bring in fresh ideas, and neither party brings anything fresh or good ideas. And then when you get somebody smart like him, he gets basically kicked around or gets discouraged, and he quits. And so you have what we call in the insurance industry adverse selection. Only you're sick.
Well, this is what you end up with in any case. I know plenty of people in California who tell me they're Democrats, and I know plenty of people in Alabama that tell me that they're Republicans. And I go and talk to them, and I'm like, but nothing you're saying sounds Republican. I speak to the Democrats, and nothing you're saying sounds Democrat. And they go, well, I have to do this because it's the only way I can participate in the political system is to join that team. And that's it. Look, I actually consider that to be a real problem. I think like even places like Alaska, it's a Republican stronghold. It shouldn't be like that. That you should have two sides because they act as a check and balance. And I think we're beginning to see that happen now in Australia, where positions are becoming cemented. We just had a state election here in Australia over the weekend in Queensland. So it's a state that is north of the state that Sydney's in. Brisbane, for those of you that have heard it, where the Olympics in 2032, I think, are going to be. And so, they've just had an election. They've switched from the Labor Party to the Liberal National Party, which is our conservative side, if you want to call it that, the centre-right side. And they actually, the Labor Party actually has experienced its worst primary turnout in 100 years. So that's a pretty significant change. At the moment, we've seen the federal government and pretty much all of the states switch to Labor, and it looks like they're now beginning to swing back. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. We potentially have a federal election coming up as well very soon, either this year or early next year. So
okay, we have a special guest, Rex Lee, who's with Cyber Talk TV, which is a very popular show on the Pod TV network, assuming it doesn't disappear in the back, which the intro to, by the way, things do disappear in the background. The intro to David Walker show literally disappeared off my system. So I used the World Edition. I'm going like, how do things get into the system and just disappear? But Rex, it looks like you're doing a new show coming up.
I'm really sorry. I have to drop off. I don't mean to be rude, Rex. I will come back as soon as I can. I just need to fix up something. So I'll be back as soon as I can. Thank you.
No problem, Shaquille. Hey, guys. It's good to be back. Yeah, we have a new program called Freedom of the Press. It's separate from Cyber Talk. And the co-host is Merle Garrison. And basically, I'm producing the show. But we're going to be tackling a lot of topics that are non-tech centric. We're still going to do a lot of tech, but we're branching out and getting away from tech and getting into more news, which is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. As you know, or many people, maybe some people in the audience have seen me on Epic Times online TV shows like NTD News, California Today, China in Focus, and Crossroads with Joshua Phillips. I'm more or less a subject matter expert on Epic Times, and I also produce a lot of investigative reports, and they become interviews as well as print articles for the newspaper and online articles. So I've been associated with the Epic Times as a freelancer since 2018. And one of the issues that I love the Epic Times to death. They're a really good, they're the fastest growing newspaper in the world. They're second to the New York Times in subscriptions. A lot of people don't know that, but they have over 20 million subscribers worldwide. So they're gaining in popularity. They're not a far right-wing publication as people like to paint them. They just are going after truth and news. And today, the problem with that, and this is why I wanted to launch Freedom of the Press. The problem with that is we're not getting a lot of truth in news. And there's a lot of journalists like myself that want to publish the truth, but there's a lot of editors that want to frame it politically left or right, rather than just report on the facts. And that's something that we want to do on Freedom of the Press. And a lot of the topics that I've been investigating lately, like lobbying through K Street law firms and so forth, and how our bills and laws are being written today. I get a little bit of coverage with the Epic Times, but they don't really allow me to do a really deep dive. So we're covering about 20 to 30 minutes worth of content in about 4 to 8 minutes per segment. And that's just not enough time. And so Merle and I are going to be doing a deep dive on these subject matters.
Well, we just so happen to have a constitutional law scholar in the mix here, Adam Lamperero, who actually teaches constitutional law at Georgia College. He can shed some light on freedom of the press. In other words, is that something important in the United States and frankly around the world as we are broadcasting internationally? What are your thoughts, Adam? Do you think that would be a good addition to our TV lineup? Because our last two shows have done really well, Medicine and Science and Timeshares. So we want to make sure that this one's successful also as well. What are your thoughts?
I think it'd be a great addition, and freedom of the press is part of a very robust First Amendment in the United States, where we want to create a marketplace of ideas in which all diverse viewpoints, however unpopular, distasteful, or offensive, are welcome. That's an essential component to liberty and a informed democracy. However, with regard to freedom of the press, although it is very robust, what we're seeing, particularly in this presidential election, is a very, very biased media, whether it's ABC, CNN, MSNBC, very biased in favor of Kamala Harris. And that kind of undercuts the purpose of the First Amendment, which is to present diverse perspectives so that people can make informed decisions in a democratic process. What I saw yesterday with J.D. Vance being interviewed by Jake Tapper, Dana Bash when she interviewed J.D. Vance, the first presidential debate, what we're seeing is the press being used essentially as a propaganda tool for the Democrats, and that's detrimental to our democracy and to truly open and diverse discourse.
Yeah,
I would have to agree with Adam on that. I was driving home, and media is also radio, and literally 3 of the stations, all I heard was how great Trump was for 4 hours of driving. It was Trump this, Trump that, he is so awesome, and the Democrats are evil and they're causing all the problems. So you're absolutely right, Adam. It's an extreme either way, in the bashing either way. And they painted the Democrats to look so evil and so hateful and so angry. I'm surprised I didn't get shot driving down the road. Around here that can happen.
Well,
but
Kim is Kim is
I'm
right.
just saying it's very prejudiced both ways.
Yes.
Yeah, Kim is right. I mean, we don't want to have a channel that's called Trump. We don't want to have a channel that vilifies Democrats and is
No, we
so
don't.
pro-Trump that you.
We don't.
And we don't want to have a
channels
channel that's all.
like that. We don't
Well,
have.
we should. Because
But isn't there a chance
we
for
should have diverse.
to take
We do
place?
have diversity. We have a lot of diversity.
You know,
Everyone.
well-
comes
Well,
on
when you
here
have
and
a channel that's
says-
pro-Trump, that doesn't serve democracy. When you have a channel that's pro-Harris, that doesn't serve democracy. You
Yeah,
want to
but
bring
the
diverse
whole way
voices.
it wasn't one channel, it was four. I sat there and flipped through it, and thanks to it being election year, I had to sit and listen to people, and it was
Well-
all the way in, four different channels, all the way in. So I finally just turned on our podcast. I figured out how to. I pulled over and set my phone up and just listened to our podcast. But yeah, it was. You know, we unfortunately get a full right wing of news here rather than, you know, a mix. There is no mix, absolutely none. PBS usually is, but it wasn't coming in today. Usually I can get NPR, but it wasn't. But yeah, it was exhausting. I will have to say, it was very exhausting. So but I'm going to have to leave. Thanks, guys. You know, we've got some great new TV shows, but I think Rex Lee's idea is really cool. And, you know, we need to support him and Merle. I love Merle. And, you know, Rex, let's get together and do some conferences next year. And I will talk to you guys later. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, Kimberly. Yeah, I wanted to expand on Adam, you know, what we're seeing in media today, and also expand a little bit on what Kim had to say, is everybody's being put into their echo chamber, so they're not reaching new listeners. So I can't turn on Fox News, for instance, and not hear a retread of what Donald Trump's policies are hourly, daily. I already know that. I'm not learning anything new. Likewise, if I turn on CNN, it's the same thing with Harris. If I turn on talk radio, it's the same thing. It's a rehash of not even really policies, wedge issues. Everybody's running on a wedge issue today that has nothing to do with the real issues or the real stories. And I'll give you an example. You know, one of the issues that people don't understand, and I think this is a huge problem. It's lobbying on K Street, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or an independent in the United States. As a voter, we send our constituents to Washington. We send our House member, whether it's a congressman or a woman, to the House of Representatives, and our senators to Washington, D.C., and we vote for a president. As soon as they get to Washington, they're conscripted by these K Street law firms who are representing the multinational corporations. And from there, it's like they stick their middle finger up and tell their constituents that you're number one. Thank you for electing me, but F you, I'm going to go serve these corporations because this is how I gain generational wealth by being a public servant, and how I gain the ability to stay in power for anywhere from 8 to 50 plus years. There's a senator in Ohio who's been he started to run during the Nixon administration. He's been there for over 50 years. This is a problem that we have, and a lot of people don't understand what exactly the lobbying is and how does it impact them. Well, if you go back to 2008, Obama ran on changing our healthcare laws and wanted to implement the Affordable Health Care Act. Well, that was the Affordable Health Care Act was architected by a insurance industry professional representing the insurance companies, a guy named Jonathan Gruber, who called the American voter stupid for not understanding how laws are written and how bills are written, that the lobbyists are writing them. This was later validated by Eric Schmidt, a former chairman and CEO of Google, who said during an Atlantic conference that he was surprised the first time that he had to go to Washington to learn how the game worked. He said that he learned that Washington is a town of incumbent politicians where lobbyists are writing their laws for them. And likewise, going back to the Jonathan Gruber example, It was written by the Affordable Health Care Act was written by the insurance industry, and they made billions and trillions of dollars in profits while all of our insurance costs went up, where the politicians went out to the constituents and said, well, we're changing the healthcare laws for you, when that wasn't the fact. They changed the healthcare laws for the insurance industry. And when you see a 4,000-page bill that's written and it's given to our elected officials at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, and they've never read the damn thing, and they have to vote on it by midnight, that's a problem. And aside from the bill being written by the lobbyists, it's slapped. All these bills are all the pork is pushed into these bills at the 11th hour in negotiations to get these things passed. And that's the biggest thing that we need to change in Washington. And nobody, I don't care if it's Donald Trump, Harris, I'm not hearing anything about cutting our spending. I'm not hearing anything about cutting government waste or anything at all. You hear a little bit of that, but all I hear constantly are these stupid wedge issues that have nothing to do with the economy or how they're going to impact us throughout the next 4 years to really lower our debt while we increase our standing in the world and economically. So these are the real issues, but nobody sees these issues, and that's the issues that we're going to be featuring on Freedom of the Press.
Yeah, well, I think those are important issues. I was talking to my business partner the other day about us getting a office and a place in Washington, D.C. And I found out I'm a member of the Florida Bar. Florida has no reciprocity with anybody, but D.C. will allow me to be admitted because I'm a member of the Florida Bar, even though we won't allow D.C. members to go in. So I can wave into Washington, D.C., become a member of the bar. Rather than try to fight the crowd, I like to join the crowd, Rex, and then have an office there on K Street. I'm working with a K Street firm right now.
Yeah.
And you're right. And also one of our clients is a very wealthy lobbying group there. Bottom line, there's a lot of money floating around in Washington,
So
D.C.
I met a guy. I was actually in Sydney on the election night when my party lost badly. We got absolutely obliterated. And I was talking to this guy who was clearly on the other side. I'm not sure why he was there because the hotel was booked out for us. And I was talking to him, and he handed me a business card. And I won't name exactly his company, but the business card was, something, Strategic Solutions. And I thought, oh, are you a finance firm? Are you a law firm? And he's like, yeah, something like that. I said, well, are you a lobbyist? Yep, I'm a lobbyist. I was like, okay, they hide behind these titles. But, to Rex's comments, we just came off a show with a Californian Republican, very moderate kind of guy, talking about what I consider to be some pretty serious issues, fixing law and order, dealing with the quality of food, all these sorts of different things. And he's got a snowball's chance in hell of winning. And that's the problem, right? That the politicians that actually get up are the ones that get up for all the wrong reasons. And those certain politicians that I don't really agree with, like Elizabeth Warren, she does make some pretty reasonable points in her criticisms of private equity. Not all private equity is bad, but sometimes it can be. Sometimes private equity games the system, games the laws and regulations, and she's trying to do something about it, and she's never going to be able to. She's never going to get the support. Republicans should be out there fighting on behalf of all of those small family farmers in rural America who are getting squeezed in every direction by the big 4 or 5 companies that control the chicken industry and the meat industry and the dairy industry and et cetera, et cetera. Why aren't Republicans out there doing that? Well, they say they're representing small families and rural businesses. They're not. And it's the same thing with most major political parties in every country. It's a very, very sad thing for us to say.
So let me give you an example. One of the things that I do on the Epic Times that a lot of other reporters aren't doing, or maybe it's getting edited by the editors, and the same thing we're going to do on Freedom of the Press is we're going to name the names. When I say the lobbyists, well, who is that? So let's go back to the Obama administration regarding Huawei. Huawei was identified as a national security threat. They build 5G infrastructure for cellular phone networks. Back then it was 3 and 4G. Today it's 5G infrastructure. And they're a company based out of China that partnered at one time with Nortel in Canada. At one point, Nortel was one of the leading telecommunication companies in the world and Canada's oldest telecommunications company. And the prime minister thought it would be a good idea to partner with Chinese companies. Well, Huawei came in there and stole all of the IP from Nortel. And before 2005, most, if not all, cellular networks around the world were using Nortel infrastructure or parts of Nortel to support their wireless infrastructure, cellular phone networks. By the time you got to 2011, they were put out of business by Huawei, who stole all of their IP, and it went out the door, and they were identified as a national security threat here in the United States, where cellular phone companies could not use Chinese infrastructure manufacturers like ZTE or Huawei within their telecommunication networks because of surveillance technology embedded in the networks by these Chinese companies who are beholden to the CCP. In 2020, the Trump administration identified ByteDance as a national security threat, and they're the developers of TikTok. Well, before I go too deep into this, I need to explain what social media companies are to begin with, whether it's Meta, ByteDance from China, Tencent, who develops a WeChat from China, Google, Microsoft's LinkedIn. These companies are data brokers who build surveillance and data mining platforms for the sole purpose of surveilling and data mining the end user for profits, which means that they monitor, track, and data mine you 24/7, 365 days a year by way of your computer, smartphone, anything that hosts their apps, which are basically legal malware. That's why.
Is that personally identifiable, Rex?
Yes, I'll go into that in a second, but I'm going to name some names here, and it's really important. That's why the Trump administration identified ByteDance. It really wasn't even the Trump administration. This came up through DHS. I was a advisor for the Department of Homeland Security regarding these threats, these Chinese apps, and I gave them my research on them. And it went up, and they were identified as a national security threat because it's a surveillance and data mining platform that surveils and data mines the end user by way of their computers and telephones. This would be no different than giving access to your business telephone or your home telephone to Chinese companies to surveil you in the 1980s and 90s before all these social media platforms proliferated. That's why they're identified as a security threat. It's not just ByteDance, it's Tencent, it's Baidu, it's all these Chinese app developers. Well, lo and behold, again, we go all the way back to lobbying. After ByteDance was run in front of the Congress and the Trump administration told them they had to sell to Microsoft, if you remember that, or Oracle was going to buy them and so forth. That all never happened. You know why? Because ByteDance went to K Street and they hired American Continental Group. Well, guess who founded American Continental Group? David Urban, a former presidential advisor to Trump. He's now on CNN as a commentator, political commentator. So you'll see David Urban on there. He was their chief lobbyist. And not only was he their lobbyist, they hired him as their North American VP, senior vice president in North America here in the United States. Why? Because he's got a social media and an app and platform development background? Hell no. He was a former presidential advisor. Fast forward 4 years later, they're not only not identified as a threat anymore, Trump actually has a TikTok account. And so do all politicians on both sides of the aisle have adopted TikTok. Also, you go back to Huawei. Now you look at Huawei stock and you ask yourself, why is their stock going up? Why are they able to proliferate their Chinese surveillance platforms in the form of 5G infrastructure? Why are they able to sell that all over the world, including it back into the United States? Different Huawei products can be sold here through third parties. Why is that? Oh, well, Tony Podesta, a former presidential advisor for Clinton and Obama, is Huawei's chief lobbyist in Washington. Now, can the United States go into China or corporations from Australia or from Europe? Can they lobby the Chinese government and the CCP to have their surveillance technology proliferated all over China, you got to ask yourself, what the hell is the United States? Are we out of our freaking minds? We're not only allowing foreign lobbyists to come in and hold influence over our elected officials, but we're allowing foreign lobbyists from adversarial companies to come into the United States and spend hundreds of millions of dollars on through K Street law firms that funnel back to these politicians, to the extent that you now have a whole litany of politicians working for these Chinese companies. It's not only David Urban. It's Ed Royce, a former congressman from California and former chairman of the House Foreign Affairs. He was hired by Tencent WeChat. Now, again, you got to ask yourself, this guy was the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Congress. Jeffrey Hogg, aide to former Congressman Bart Gordon, Democrat, Tennessee, and Mike McClintock, Democrat, North Carolina, were also hired by Huawei as advisors. So you see these U.S. politicians not only get elected, they represent these corporations on K Street after their political careers are over, and now they're going to work for these corporations at the expense of the United States national security.
Yeah, well, aren't they sending a message to poor politicians that, yes, you can get rich in America by basically selling all your influence once you leave office? Would that
selling your bloody soul and your integrity, more like it? Rex,
Yes,
I wanted to ask you.
This is treasonous. That's treasonous.
I wanted to ask you because we've talked about this. I wanted to ask you a question. We've talked about this for a few years now, and just as a sort of a side note. So, because I travel a lot, there's certain programs and things that I'm looking for a way to like make sure it's always available to me, and I can log into it from remote places, etc., etc. And I considered, putting stuff in the cloud or having a virtual server and all that sort of stuff. And I went, oh, look, I don't know what I'm doing. So what I'll do is I'll get a computer and have remote access to that. And the computer will be, in one of my houses. And if it goes down, well, I'll just have to put up with that until somebody can go over and restart the computer. But what does a person do? I mean, the phones are great. There's great technology on there. Do we host all of these apps somewhere separately on a different device and remotely access it, so it's not actually on our device, so they never know exactly where we are and where we're traveling to or what restaurants we're going to and all that sort of stuff? Or is it hopeless? What does the everyday person do?
So there's decentralized technology. Elon Musk is a big proponent for decentralized technology. It's referred to as Web3, and you're going to hear a lot about it. A lot of what he's doing with his site services, his low orbiting satellite services, Skylink, is going to be supporting a private version of the internet that you're going to be able to get on what's called decentralized technology. There's a company out of California that I do consulting for. They're called Purism, and they're the only company. They were featured on CNBC recently. They're one of the only companies in the world or in America that manufactures a cell phone in the United States using made in America electronics. So the whole ecosystem of the cell phone is supported by made in America electronics for true security.
What was the name of the company, sorry?
It's Purism.
What was the name of the company?
Purism.
Purism.
Yeah, and Purism, they also have their own operating system, which is a non-Android Linux OS called Pure OS. That supports it with secure apps. They also manufacture servers, laptops, tablets, and PCs and so forth. Some of their other products, they even have another smartphone, use Chinese components in the phones, but they say they're secure. But their Liberty phone is manufactured in the United States. But there's one thing that is secure no matter what. It's their operating system, Pure OS. And the apps that support it, they're not backed by a targeted advertising business model rooted in surveillance capitalism like the Android OS, Apple iOS, and Microsoft Windows 8, 10, and 11 operating systems. They're all supported by a targeted advertising business model rooted in surveillance capitalism. This is why you have to click on I agree to use all their products. With Purism, you don't click on I agree to use the OS. You don't click on I agree to use the apps.
Somebody like myself is a complete technological moron.
Yeah.
Is this going to be easy enough to use? And can I still use the other
it's a
apps
point
like,
and
you know,
click.
my banking app and all that sort of stuff that I
Yeah,
use all
it's
the
a
time?
touch, tap, and swipe operating system. There would be some to migrate to it would be a little difficult. One of the things, if you do like technology, what I tell people first and foremost is don't crawl, don't walk, but run away from anything made by Alphabet or Google. They started off a data broker. They will always be a data broker. Everything they build is for the collection of information from their end users for profit. So
Can you get the normal sort of apps? Like, for example, my banking app. Can I have that on the Purist phone,
no.
or is that not going to work?
Where I'm going is if don't do anything Alphabet. Just get rid of that. Migrate to Apple. Apple will support everything that you need, and you can button down the Apple iOS almost 100%. You are going to get surveilled and data mined by Apple, but only Apple. You can go into the operating system and secure it from the firmware level of the operating system. You have to know what you're doing, and I help businesses and people do this. A lot of people look at privacy on their phone and they go, oh, I can turn off the microphone of this app or they reset. That's not doing it at the system level. There's a way you can go into iOS and Mac OS and secure it from the firmware level of the OS, where you don't, and it's not laborious. You don't have to keep up with it. It just shuts off all access to those things. And you can, if your app needs your camera, then you can turn it on as needed for the apps that you want to use, and it'll turn off after you're done. So there's no surveillance and data mining 24/7 on Apple, but you have to learn how to configure it, because Apple's a big chunk of their revenue comes from targeted advertising. So all the surveillance and data mining is defaulted on when you buy an Apple product. So what I suggest and what I do is I buy Apple products that are not activated yet, and then I turn them on and configure them first for privacy. Then I activate them on the internet or on my network, and they're completely private. But I want to get back to the lobbying of what's going on. A lot of people ask, how did this happen? What's going on? A lot of people don't know that the lobbyists, the tech lobby, especially the U.S., I call it the U.S.-China tech lobby, they are a national security threat, not just for the fact that these Chinese companies are hiring K Street law firms, but a lot of people don't realize how many former tech lobbyists. It goes two ways. It's not just the elected officials going to work for these tech companies by proxy through K Street law firms in Washington. A lot of the lobbyists are appointed to our government. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, is a former Microsoft lobbyist for West Exec Advisors. He's our Secretary of State. Avril Haines, Director of National Intelligence, the CIA, is a former lobbyist from West Exec Advisors. Jake Sullivan is also a former Microsoft lobbyist. So basically, you have Microsoft not just holding influence over our elected officials through their lobbyists on K Street. These people are running our country. Cynthia Hogan, a former Apple lobbyist, works in the Biden administration as an advisor. Jeff Riccati is an Amazon lobbyist, and his brother is Chief White House Counsel Steve Riccati. Jeff Riccati, Jeff Riccati, and is the brother of Steve Riccati, the White House counsel. So as you go down this list of people who are lobbyists, they're running our country. Silicon Valley has taken over the U.S. government, and they're influencing both sides of the aisle. They hire both law firms that hold influence over both sides of the aisle. They're probably the most unbiased people versus the media. They don't care. They want to control both sides of the aisle, so they spread their money almost equally among Republican and Democrats when it comes to lobbying.
And why isn't the mainstream media, why don't they bring these facts out, Rex? I mean, I didn't know Blinken was like a Microsoft lobbyist. Why does the mainstream
Oh, I've given
final.
this information to other journalists that follow me. As you know, I have a really big following of journalists on my LinkedIn account. Forbes, Bloomberg, the head of one of the advisory board members for Forbes, Wayne Lowenstein. I'm friends with Lane. He's their tech advisor for Forbes. All these people follow me, and I've given them this information, and the mainstream media, they don't, you know why they don't put it out there, or they don't put out other information that's newsworthy. Like when I discovered Chinese surveillance technology in a mainstream smartphone that everybody was buying, the Samsung Galaxy Note, and I gave that to DHS back in 2016. All these companies are their biggest advertisers. Just watch a football game and you can't get away from T-Mobile, Amazon, Meta, Google. They probably represent 75% of all advertising on TV. So these news organizations, it's not like the movie The Insider. That's a bunch of BS. If that was true at one point regarding the insider who came forward in the cigarette or tobacco industry, who showed evidence because he was a chemist, and showed hard evidence that they were putting addictive chemicals aside from the addictive nature of nicotine and amping up the addictiveness of tobacco products. He came forward in the 90s and gave all the information to a 60 Minutes producer, who they actually shot the whole segment. It went all the way up the ladder, and Reynolds came in and had the story kiboshed, where 60 Minutes didn't show it. And that caused, that's actually was the tipping point that caused the congressional hearings, because once they went forward, the media companies couldn't hide the fact that they were in bed with the lobbyists anymore, even to the detriment of the U.S. citizen. So that happened in the 90s. You won't see that anymore. These guys own K Street. They own the elected officials. They own all the media companies with their advertising. Not only that, they're the major multinational corporations consolidating the media industry through streaming services. So you have Amazon consolidating all of these streaming services. They own a movie company. They own their major shareholder in Sony Pictures. You have Meta doing the same thing. You have all of these companies that have, Apple has their own streaming service. They all have their own streaming services, and they're buying up all these different media. So it's like if you go back in time and you see the movie Citizen Kane, and a lot of people ask, why is Citizen Kane one of the most important movies of all time? Well, that was the premise of Citizen Kane. It was based on William Randolph Hearst, who was consolidating radio, TV, books, newspapers at the time. And Orson Welles saw this as a threat, so he wrote Citizen Kane to expose it, to say, hey, look, if you allow somebody to control print, media, newspapers, books, film, radio, they could actually manipulate news stories to start a war. And that was the premise of the movie, was the consolidation of mass media, and what a threat that would be, because the person behind that could spread mis and disinformation to the extent that they can start a war. Well, we see that today. So when you look at these tech lobbyists who are now in our government and heads of these agencies, these important agencies, and then you look at their lobbyists holding influence over our elected officials, and these companies consolidating all of these industries, the operating system industry, the the apps, the social media, the AI, it's all being developed by the same companies who are now consolidating mass media. They're buying newspapers. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, for example. And these tech billionaires are buying up newspapers and these hedge funds and all that. But it's the same people controlling everything. And now we're seeing that today they're actually picking our candidates who we're voting for. I know this is controversial. I'm an independent. I love Joe Lieberman. I supported him. I supported Kennedy this past election. I supported Bernie Sanders in the past. I've also voted for conservatives as well. I voted for Obama and Biden as well as Trump. So I'm an independent, and I voted for both Democrats and Republicans. But if you look at what happened in this election, the independent and the Democrat had their right to vote for their candidate stolen from them. I didn't have the right to go down and vote in a primary, a Democrat primary, as an independent, because nobody gave me that right when they installed Kamala Harris without a primary. So now you got to ask who's running the show. When you look behind the teleprompter, it's these people that I just named that are behind the teleprompter controlling things. That's the problem with our government. And my fear is no matter who gets into office, they're going to be beholden to these same puppet masters, no matter who gets elected this go around.
Yeah, Rick.
You're muted, Rick. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Rick, you're muted.
I see it. Sorry about that. So let's talk about the LA Times and the Washington Post. LA Times, owned by a South African billionaire, for the first time refused to endorse a presidential candidate. Bezos's Washington Post, again, refused to endorse.
Because I think they know. I think that. Sorry. I thought you finished. Sorry.
I am.
I think because they know the writing's on the wall. Just very quickly, for at least for the point of amusing Rex, the reason I just dropped off while you were talking, Rex, was when you said what you said. I thought I'd quickly look at my security settings on my Samsung phone, and I hit something on my Bitdefender, and I actually accidentally took myself off. But yeah, look, Rick, I think that's the writing's on the wall. Look, yeah, what we just saw here in Queensland, in Australia.
In the case of Bezos, who owns a bunch of, Amazon, or
I don't think that Bezos is going to be too keen on taxes on unrealized capital gains and all the other things that they're talking about. But
also, he's afraid of getting in trouble. Trump can wreck a company at least.
So too can the Dems. We just had an election here, state election in Queensland. Now, the outgoing premier jumps on and just, instead of being in any way gracious or anything, just jumps up and just, says the most ridiculous things about his opponent that just beat him. And then says, he didn't really, it's not over yet. He may not have actually won the election when there was 12 seats left and he had to win 10 of them in order to win. I mean, it was ridiculous. I think that there just seems to be, in my eyes, there seems to be a tendency for centre-left parties in the Western world to just go, I'm not listening, I'm not seeing, I'm not doing anything, whatever you say, yeah, you're a crazy person. Like there's just no self-reflection. I've said this so many times before, but there's never a kind of, are we the bad guys? Are we out of touch? Is there anything that we need to do differently? And because of that, you end up with this sort of situation. Now, the Dems at this point have got to know, somewhere deep down, somewhere, their strategists have got to know that they've got a problem. I mean, it's so unlikely. Poly markets are now pricing, they might have changed a little bit now, but before the show, they're pricing Trump as a 67% chance of winning. They're pricing him as a 65% chance of winning Pennsylvania. That they must know there's an issue here. And I think that those big media companies are like, yeah, well, maybe we shouldn't endorse. Maybe, our readership's down, our viewership's down. Maybe it's time for us to, get politics out of the way and to start actually just doing journalism. How do you get the Epoch Times, right? A relatively small thing, starts up out of nowhere. It's got a pretty decent subscriber base. I read it here in Australia. For some bizarre reason, every time I try to subscribe to it, it keeps subscribing me to the Australian one. I can't necessarily see the American stuff, which is actually what I want to say. I don't really care about too much what's happening in Australia because I don't live here. But yeah, I mean, it just, you see these big newspapers and look at what's going on. And for anybody who can see the old movie from the 70s, Network, the guy comes out and gives that beautiful speech. And you watch that and you think, well, that was 50 years ago. I saw that when I was a teenager, learning about propaganda at school, right? And we read 1984, we read these different things. And then one of my teachers said, hey, and it was a liberal teacher. It was a lefty kind of teacher who said, don't listen to the left and don't listen to the right. Look at how they manipulate you. Now, I wish they taught that sort of stuff in schools. So that teacher said, go watch this movie, Network. And I loved it. I don't know where to get it now. I'll have to try and buy it on DVD or something.
So, Shaquille, you'll love this. If you go through my Pod TV video on demand, I did a little segment on the Ned Beatty speech from Network. And I actually show the whole speech on there so people understand what it is. And for those of you in our audience who don't understand what this is, and it's highly relevant to our election today, there's a network anchor, would have been like somebody like Dan Rather at the end of his career, finally snaps and starts telling the truth about the news on TV. About the back then, the big worry was how the Saudis were buying up all this real estate in the United States and buying all our businesses and everything. And so all these news stories that were slanted negative towards the Saudis were being killed and all this other stuff for political interests. And finally, he comes out and just tells the truth about this, and he's going to kill probably billions, if not trillions of dollars in business between the United States and Saudi Arabia. So the media company he works for is a conglomerate like you see today. And Ned Beatty's the chairman of that media group, and he calls the network guy up, even though the guy's got off the chart ratings. He's number one for telling the truth. Everybody wants to tell the truth. He also manipulated everybody who watches his show to stick their head out their windows and say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this shit anymore. Excuse my French, but everybody starts yelling that, and that became the theme of the everyday person is, I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take this anymore. So he finally gets called up to Ned Beatty's office, and Ned Beatty welcomes him there, thanks him basically for the great ratings that he's doing. He said, and he brings him into the boardroom and says, welcome to Valhalla, and he sits him down. And he's real calm at first. He shuts the blinds down, and the room gets real dark. And then Ned Beatty leans over him like a god. Do you know who you're messing with? You're messing with commerce and trade. Do you think the Russians care about Marx? They don't. They're counting their rubles. You're messing with the world economy and all this other stuff. And he basically explains that the world is nothing but a corporation, and that no matter who you are at once you get to the top layer, the 1%ers there's no borders, language, or culture. They only understand how the money moves around the world and how to manipulate that. He basically told them, hey, the Saudis need to pay us back. We need the billions of dollars that they're going to invest in here so that we can reinvest that money and so forth. But he basically explains to him that there's no borders, language, or cultures with the 1% that are ruling everything around the planet. It's a beautiful speech.
There was another movie that dealt with media as well, and I just can't think of the name off the top of my head. But I think one of Tom Cruise's wives were in it, or one of his ex-wives. I think it was Mimi Rogers was in it, and that sort of got quite into the media. Again, it's an older thing. But I think people do need to look at that and look at the media, look at the whole situation with government, look at the lobbyists. Yeah. Because the big thing is that we don't have to live like this. Yeah. The government is supposed to be a tool for all of us. And unfortunately, the one group of people that don't have a lobby group, the one group of people that don't have any press agents, it's the public. Exactly. The public doesn't have anything.
If every citizen who's not a member of these big corporations gave $1 a month to a law firm in Washington, they'd be the biggest lobby, and they would make billions. A law firm should go open up and say, hey, we're going to rake in more money than all the corporations.
I'll be over tomorrow. We'll set up an office. I'll get my business fees and we'll employ you. We're onto it. Rex, good idea. Yeah, we'll give you a commission for it.
All right. So I'm a big lib, okay? So I get told a lot that the Epoch Times is the devil, and that it's a propaganda organization, owned by the Falun Gong. So tell me why I should read the Epoch Times.
Okay, can I go first before Rex does?
Sure.
Because if you're a big lib, like I think I am, you don't trust what you're being told by anybody. Go read it for yourself and then find out.
Yeah,
that's why I read the LA Times. That's why I read the New York Times. That's why I read the Washington Post. That's why I read the Guardian. I check all of this stuff.
Exactly. I'm just going to parrot what Shaquille said. If you come in my house in the morning, CBS is on in the morning. I watch CBS with Gel. In the afternoon, I may turn on the 5 or something from Fox. I'll go over and I'll look at Newsmax. I don't allow anybody to tell me this news channel is evil. This is not good. I'll formulate my own opinion. And I do that with periodicals. I'm a big fan of the New York Times. I read a lot of the New York Times, but I read a lot of Epoch Times as well. The only reason that I got associated with Epoch Times is when I broke the story about the Chinese surveillance technology in the Samsung Galaxy Note. That was newsworthy globally. And I also, I'm going to go ahead and talk about CBS 60 Minutes. Kevin Tedesco, one of the producers over there, contacted me about my findings and said, hey, we want to report on this. Pitch us the story, and we'll report on it. I spent months putting this together with him, and suddenly everything went dark. Nobody wanted anything to do with it. And then NBC, talked to a lady at NBC, same thing. They were excited about it. This, everybody needs to know this. It went dark. The only publication that contacted me that wanted to publish my findings was the Epoch Times. And later on, I drew it back to, I was watching football again. I'm a big football fan, no secret in that. And I'm watching the game one night, and I couldn't figure out what happened to Kevin over there at 60 Minutes. We had a great relationship. We were passing all this information back and forth. And I'm looking at my ads on TV, and I said, oh, shit, my story involves every major advertiser. It involved Samsung. I bought the phone from a T-Mobile corporate store. It involved Alphabet, Google, and those were all the commercials that I was watching on TV. So, of course, NBC and CBS pulled the plug on my story. And the Epoch Times went on to publish it, and they were the only newspaper that Google, Samsung, and T-Mobile couldn't get a retraction on because the information that I provided. I'm a former app and platform developer. I reverse engineered it, so I provided the code. I didn't say, hey, it's in there. I provided the code. They were going to be told to retract those stories because it was damaging to those companies. Like all other people, if you ever seen a story about Alphabet and then it gets retracted, that didn't happen with the Epoch Times because it was factually true. And before I went public, I gave my findings to Samsung, I gave my findings to T-Mobile, and I gave them to Alphabet, Google, to research. Why? Because the Department of Homeland Security asked me to be an advisor for DHS study on mobile device security because of my findings. And I was working for DHS, and I wanted to make sure that the information I provided DHS was accurate and true. So that's why I
hope DHS is looking after you because you might have a few enemies around the world.
Yeah, I do. Rick.
Maybe I'll take another look. My buddy's always sending me Epoch Times stories on COVID, which I don't like their COVID reporting at all. I don't buy that. But maybe some media sources are better in some areas than others. That makes sense.
Yeah, just read it and make your own mind up. You can't. What I do is I'll take one article from Epoch Times. I'll take the same news story from the Wall Street Journal, the same news story from the Washington Post, and the same news story from the New York Times. And sometimes I reconcile. If you want to know the truth, they all report the truth. It's then that you see that the truth gets editorialized by each publications. And the Epoch Times is guilty of this to some extent, but they're not as bad as the other ones. So the truth will then get editorialized and it'll get marginalized. And then the truth doesn't become the story. Maybe they take a shot at the messenger. The messenger becomes the story rather than the truth of the story. And you'll see that's common, whether you're watching Fox, CNN, Newsmax, CBS, or whatever, or you're reading the print article in the New York Times. So they'll all have a thread of the truth so they can say they're reporting the truth. It's how they editorialize it and the narration of the article. And that's what you have to sift through and say, okay, I'm not going to buy into the editorialized or the narration of this article, but the truth is in there somewhere.
I personally think it's quite important to get a well-rounded view of things. And if we leave politics and general news stories aside for a moment, because I don't like politics and I'm not into politics, believe it or not. I'm really not interested most of the time. I just want to be left alone. But when I look at what I'm doing, when I'm trading the markets, I read a lot of financial press, a lot of like business news and stuff like that. And oftentimes they'll tell me, the market's doing really well. Or then other things will say, the market's not going to be doing well. We're heading for a recession. So I'm going to try and read the two opposite positions from as many different sources as I can and then work out what I think is best. And then I construct my trade positions based on what I've learned from them and what I personally think as well. And so I think that if you're interested in politics or in news or in anything, it's important to try to get as holistic a view as possible and recognize that you're probably being told, half truths or truths that are selective. Like this is true, but there might be more to the story, and you kind of just don't trust what you're being told. I don't know why anybody would trust what they're being told.
Well, even if I look, like I said, I'm a libertarian. I'm a fiscal conservative, but I'm a libertarian. I voted for Democrats and Republicans throughout my lifetime. I used to slant more to the left, but as I got a little bit older and I started looking at, it started with Bernie Sanders. I was supporting Bernie Sanders, and then the Democrat Party threw him under the bus. And I'm like, hey, they're cannibalizing their own. How can I trust this? They're not giving me the right to vote for Bernie Sanders. My own party, or the party I was supporting at that time, is telling me he's the bad guy now. When
in Washington State,
I don't agree with him fiscally. His socialist policies I don't agree with, but I like his libertarian policies and his viewpoint on big business and government. He's actually really interesting if you listen to him in different podcasts. Very much like Joe.
Look at what happened up in Washington State. Look at what happened with Washington State, right, where primary voters had their votes overridden by superdelegates. Now, if you're a Democrat from Washington State, you should be pissed.
Your own party they're interfering with your right to vote. They're the ones. That's election interference within the own party. Joe Lieberman was the same way. I love Joe Lieberman to death. And then all of a sudden he was kicked out of the Democrat Party once he starts speaking the truth about something. You're seeing that with the mayor of New York, Eric Adams. He started coming out and saying, hey, we have too much immigration here, yada, yada. Next thing you know, the feds are kicking in his door. It happened to Henry Collier, a Democrat that I've been voting for years here in Texas, who's our congressman, starts going to Washington. Hey, the border's out of control. We need some help. Next thing you know, the feds are kicking in his door. And he's being ratted out by his own party. And then once I started looking into that, I started thinking about, why am I supporting Democrats anymore? Every time I listen to a blue dog Democrat, that halfway makes sense. The party starts to cannibalize that blue dog Democrat. And I'm like, why is the party cannibalizing itself? You can't even have an open a discussion of ideas within the party. So very much.
And we have something that's cannibalizing us, which is
I got to go
out of time. So I want to thank all the viewers and the people around the world, and of course Jatovi, who sat by patiently and didn't get a word in edgewise. And we'll see you next week on the show. Bye bye.
Hey, y'all have a good